So, 2018 is now very much over, and I'm late to the party with my top 10. No surprise there. Still, there's been some great releases this year, several of which seem to be conspicuously absent from many other end-of-year lists, so I'm here, as ever, to right all the injustices of this world. You're welcome, world. Let's get started, shall we? I'll admit, it took me a little while to accept NNK2. I played a little of it on my channel before my computer started violently objecting, and to begin with was honestly a little disappointed with the shift from creature battler to more standard hacky-slashy action RPG. And honestly, when compared to its predecessor, which was one of my favourite games of this decade, it does seem a little anemic, partly due to its somewhat less poignant story and annoyingly voiced protagonist. So why does it get my number 10 spot? Simply because a bad NNK is still a great game by most standards. The graphics are gorgeous, the enemy and environment design in particular standing out for their whimsical elegance, reminding me of Dragon Quest but without the Down syndrome characters. The score is breathtaking, the combat simple yet enjoyable, the minigames and side content well developed and narratively appropriate. It's unfair to compare any game to the original NNK, but even with those comparisons in place, this game still holds up to scrutiny, which is an impressive achievement indeed. Two entries in, and so far they've both been promising but flawed JRPGs. Octopath Traveler clearly had a goal in mind, to evoke the feeling of the mid-90s and the absolute classics of the genre that were released at that time. And on most counts, it exceeds those goals. The sprite art meets simple 3D aesthetic, manages to construct some surprisingly detailed scenes without losing that retro vibe. The washed out colour palette, though drab at times, allows for some areas to seem shockingly beautiful by comparison. The voice acting is solid, barring a couple of exceptions, and the dialogue seems surprisingly well written. And then there's the combat, and oh boy, all those naysayers who claim that turn-based combat is an outdated system need to check in on the depth and variety offered by this incredibly robust combat system, where each of the main characters brings a myriad of skills to the table which rarely seem superfluous or unnecessary. I might even go so far as to say that the weak points and saved action system used here is the best you can find in any JRPG, period. This game could have been Game of the Year contender if not for one thing, and that's the story. In Octopath, the 8 main characters each have their own story, and outside of a handful of optional dialogues, basically never interact with one another. And that will be fine, if not for the way the game is structured around completing each character's story chapter before moving on, meaning it can be like 20 hours of what is essentially busy work between two parts of a character's story. The result is a structureless, haphazard mess, which is fun to play, but a chore to experience, if that makes any sense. And here's the token controversial pick. I personally really enjoyed Let's Go Eevee, but I know an awful lot of people hate it with the burning passion of 1,000 Suns. And I get it, I really do. The game and its partner, remakes of Pokemon Yellow for the Game Boy, could easily seem like a step in the wrong direction. Compared to last year's Pokemon Sun and Moon, the battle system was simplified, removing both hold items and abilities. The Pokemon variation was stripped back from 800 odd to 151, and wild Pokemon battles were removed entirely in favour of a catching minigame. However, I feel like the game has been unjustly maligned. First off, removing random battles in favour of overworld encounters is an objectively good move because, let's face it, no one wants to have to run away from 180 Zubats just to pass through Mount Moon. Secondly, despite claims that the game was going to be too easy, it was honestly a much harder game than its predecessor, with enemy AI vastly improved and trainers Pokemon out-leveling mine for most of the game. Replacing the arduous EV system with a straightforward stat-boosting Candy system was also a stroke of genius which I hope to see return, and above all, seeing Kanto rendered as a fully 3D world and getting to experience it with my inquisitive little Eevee companion was a nostalgia trip my body was not ready for. While I'd love to have abilities and hold items back, I can honestly say that I love the direction that Let's Go took the series and hope it continues on this path for next year's Generation 8 games. Finally, something that isn't a JRPG. This game was always destined to make my list, being a sequel to the rip your heart out and stomp on it classics To the Moon and A Bird Story. An RPG Maker walking simulator with no voice acting and minimal sprite animation might seem like an unlikely game to give you a bad case of the feels, but Game creator Kangao is an absolute master of narrative construction, delivering emotion through music and knowing just when to have a character deliver the perfect line to make you cry like a little baby. It goes without saying at this point that the sprite art is top notch, that the game is well paced and clever, and the inevitable twist will keep you guessing, and being wrong, right up until it sucker punches you in the gut. If you liked To the Moon, pick this up too, and if you didn't, then this isn't for you. If you've never played either game, then check them out. That's about all I need to say. And another JRPG. But this one's a strategy JRPG. That's gotta be worth diversity points, right? I've not played Valkyria Chronicles 2 or 3 due to them being exclusive to a console that literally nobody owns, but it's pretty obvious going from 1 to 4 that Sega are happy with their formula and would rather refine it than try to innovate for innovation's sake. I guess what I'm saying is this game is practically the same as the first one, just with prettier graphics, more likeable characters, and a couple of new unit types. And that's fine. As someone who's played thousands of hours of Souls-likes and Pokemon games, I can hardly claim that I need a game to be original to be good. I've had a lot of fun with this. It never ceases to be satisfying to headshot a guy from across the map with Kai or mow down 10 guys with Raz during a one-man commando mission of a turn, and I think it owes a lot to the way this series melds SRPG with first-person shooter so seamlessly in a way that no other game has managed or even really tried. So yeah, if you want a strategy game that's visceral and challenging without being as punishing as games like XCOM or Fire Emblem, maybe check this out. Speaking of games which stick to a formula but do it well, here's a game from some of the guys who made Theme Hospital, which is basically Theme Hospital 2. Bullfrog were always one of my favourite developers, and while it's sad that they got the EA treatment, it's great that developers are finally starting to pick up where they left off. 2 Point Hospital is the sequel Theme Hospital deserved but never got. All the core mechanics are there, all the room construction, staff management, the research and development for the wacky diseases and the innate challenges unique to each hospital, but the game is just more of that. More rooms, more diseases, more cosmetic items which increase the attractiveness of the hospital to help keep patients occupied. You can tell that the guys behind this game are ex-Bullfrog. They tick every box for what you'd want from a new Theme Hospital game, and the additions all feel natural and worthwhile. Honestly, now that this game exists, I can't see a reason to ever go back to the original classic, and that is pretty much the highest praise this game could hope for. Yeah, I know, it's just Smash again, but everyone is here. I know the Melee purists will grumble, but this game really does feel like the ultimate Smash game. All the characters from the previous 4 games, most of the stages, a huge selections of items and assist trophies, and an even bigger music library. This game has enough content to keep matchups feeling fresh and exciting for years. The new Spirits mode is interesting, if a little light on story after the first cutscene, and offers hundreds if not thousands of unique event matches to satisfy the single player crowd. And with the improvements to AI and 70 odd characters to learn, there's always another hurdle to overcome. My nitpicks are few and far between. A story for Spirits mode would have been nice, as would variation to the bonus stage in Classic mode, but for the most part Smash Ultimate really is the game that keeps on giving, even to a casual fan like myself. This one was a surprise. I went in expecting some mindless hack and slash fun and got, well, mindless hack and slash feels. Old man Kratos is a very different beast to the man we knew from the previous God of War games, and the simple story of travelling with his son to scatter his wife's ashes reflects that. Don't get me wrong, the combat is still very visceral, gory, and over the top, but the big difference is that Kratos isn't seeking it this time around, it's seeking him. I've never gone to a God of War game for a powerful story or top-notch voice acting, but those areas are where this game really shines. Kratos' son Atreus is surprisingly thoughtful and likeable, especially when compared to other children in video games, and the main antagonist and his surrounding cast, god it's hard not to get too spoilery here, are some of the most interesting and memorable characters in recent history. If I have a complaint, it's that too much of this game is spent in caves or in snowy wastelands. Some of the areas of this game look absolutely stunning, so a little more of that and a little less brown and white would have been good. Still, this game is hands down my favourite AAA title of the year, and a standard that others in the industry should really be aspiring to. So I overplayed my hand a bit there, saying that God of War is my favourite AAA title. I guess you now know that numbers 2 and 1 are going to be indie games. And honestly, it was a very close run thing to decide which one got the top spot, but in the end this one fell ever so slightly behind. Death's Gambit is a phenomenal game. I went in expecting very little, expecting to go through the motions of another Souls-like. have a few peaks of accomplishment upon defeating tricky bosses, and then move on with my life. I was not expecting to discover my new favourite game in the genre, second only to the original Dark Souls itself. This game feels like the distilled essence of Souls. Everything you'd want from the genre is everything it does well. The enemy designs are horrific and creative, the NPCs are bizarre but likeable, the areas are visually unique and ingeniously designed, the combat system is fluid as all hell, the RPG mechanics allow for countless different playstyles based on weapons, skill and stat preference, and the boss fights, god damn there are some good boss fights. While a couple are a little gimmicky, everyone has its own challenge, and some of them are so gloriously hectic and reaction heavy that they feel like something straight out of Bloodborne. Add into the mix some interesting world lore and a main character with actual goals and history, and well, fuck. Is it too late to swap this to the number 1 spot? Yes, Joe, it is too late. You've played Iconoclast now, and there is no way anything is going to knock that off its rightful throne. This game is essentially a Metroidvania at heart, a huge world that slowly expands as your protagonist's repertoire expands, but unlike most games in that genre, it rarely gets bogged down with backtracking and using X item in Y place several dozen times. Instead, its pacing is near perfect, hurtling along a story-driven path with as much grace and fluidity as the smooth-as-butter controls. Visually, it makes great use of colour and dynamic character designs, and the music does a stellar job of setting the mood, from the chirpy early town themes to the soul-destroying coda during the fight with the Ivory Beast. And the bosses, while not as challenging as those in Death's Gambit or God of War, are plentiful, creatively designed both visually and mechanically, and in the case of the main antagonists, have their own distinctive personalities, drives and quirks which make them far more compelling characters than simple sprites have any right to be. Slightly bizarre ending notwithstanding, this game is the most fun I've had this year and managed to tell an oddly powerful story in the process. And annoyingly, it was made entirely by one guy. Some people have all the talent. And that's the lot. So what do you guys think? Good picks? Bad picks? Do you want to stab me multiple times in the face for my sheer lack of taste in video games? Let me know in the comments, or just ineptly scream at your screen. Whatever works for you. Anyway, I've still got my music list to compile before we can get back to playing games again, so keep an eye out for that if you're at all interested in any more of my opinions. Otherwise, I'll see you guys later. Ciao.